Hiya there. This is a CARLTON Witch Ramble. So, Luke says, and here's "It's not mine, nor did I post it, accidental ball sack incident," has seemingly come to an end, I guess. And there are a number of different opinions on the situation, including the very loud but lacking passion screech of, "The AFL said he was innocent, so leave him alone." But as someone who has been a Carlton supporter for a few years, who has intensely followed the team and the psyche of each and every one of those young men wearing the blues proudly on their chest every week, I have some thoughts. One of those thoughts comes from a frustration of having to hear the players be inundated with supporter and media opinions about needing to grow up and take responsibility for the win, take responsibility for how they play, needing to take the game into their own hands, take responsibility for training, be men out there, etc., etc., and on and on and on. And now we have just had to watch the man in one of the highest king chairs of the football club put his tail between his legs, say some weird words, severely lacking responsibility and maturity over what he himself allowed supporters and anyone within the Carlton inner circle to experience. So where is the example of this take responsibility narrative that these players have had to listen to for the whole second half of the last year? And also, it is my belief that this top of the iceberg shadiness that we've just seen through this accidental sharing of flaccid male genitalia on social media is part and parcel to the weird as hell energy and vibes between some of the players and the coaches, and those were very clearly evident watching the BNF last year. So let me tell you a bit about Luke, using my practice skills of mapping a psyche. Luke is someone who is deliberate and very calculated with his words. When you ask him a direct question, he would choose his words very specifically, and he would only speak if he has chosen those words very carefully, even if that means he would have to stay in an awkward silence. He's someone whose speech is very purposeful and very intentional. He would be quiet about uncertainties, but loud about convictions. So a lot can be discovered about someone like this if you pay attention to what they are not saying. He's very skeptical and distrusting, and he uses language as a means to get what he wants. He's a master of secrecy, and he would only reveal what serves his purpose. Now, in relationships, which is necessary to understand for the theme in which we see him needing to step down, he sort of would seek ownership over lovers. Now, desire would be an overwhelming force for him, one that he would sometimes struggle to control. Jealousy, envy, regret, they'd all be very familiar to him, but rather than avoiding them, he would lean into them, experimenting with their impact. And for someone like him, jealousy is not just a threat to love, but it's an experience that he needs to explore and even eroticize. This is someone who would very likely engage in relationship dynamics like non-monogamy, not because it comes easily to him, but because it is difficult and it would challenge his emotional boundaries in a way that he finds intriguing. He is someone who really tries to do what is least expected. He rebels against any burden of self-image in particular. Now, whether that is externally or internally, he challenges himself to do what even he himself would least expect himself to do. At times, this would be somebody who would make an active choice to do the opposite of what people are expecting them to do. Very motivated by collapsing any expectation that the self-identity should become knowable. Now, the way he moves is a bit of a puzzle. He does things that confuse that idea of self-identity, and he loves a confusing decision just as much as he loves a person who would make it. He loves people who live on the wild side of life, people who can't be predicted, and he has no patience for people who live according to other people's rules. He is someone who never feels like they're doing the right thing because their overall motivation is to do the opposite to what feels right and to hope that someone might question them or almost dare to have an opinion about what they're doing. His idea of the right thing to do would therefore exist in a very abstract space that most of us don't have access to. It's a very authentic right or wrong for him. Now, he does have a fear of success, which is very interesting. But that fear of success only exists because success tends to define someone's identity. And he'd likely use power of being cynical, because he refuses to allow anyone to define what success looks like for him and what it looks like on him. So humor, mockery, satire, self-flagellation, all of those things would be used. And he'd be more willing to give up on success than to let anyone tell him how to live his life. Now, in a weird way, he doesn't even obey ideas of who he believes himself to be. He's more willing to be strange than to be what he already knows himself to be. And he would much rather behave in confusing ways than allow people to have expectations of who he is. Now, one of my specialties in my line of work is pointing out wound stories that deeply affect the way we move in the world. So let's have a look at Luke's. Now, his past has absolutely left emotional scars. Growing up, he wouldn't have gotten the nurturing he needed, which leads to lingering insecurity and anxiety. So his home life may have been very stressful, very chaotic maybe, leaving him a bit unseen, a bit unsupported. His mother likely struggled to connect emotionally, had more things on her mind, more serious things, and his father was very focused on financial stability over emotional depth, which would have left him with a very complicated idea of relationship toward love and validation. Now, as a result, he has likely spent much of his life trying to avoid conflict, even if that means putting others' needs ahead of his own. And of course, even if that means using words very carefully to construct an illusion in order to avoid conflict and to remain in control of everything he believes he possesses. But this pattern comes with a cost of burnout, with loneliness, and a lingering fear of being a burden to people. Now, he doesn't ask for help easily, and when things get tough, would very likely turn to unhealthy coping mechanisms. Now, whether that be things like substance use or clinging to relationships that no longer serve him, or other types of obsessive and addictive behaviors, which, being someone like Luke, whose psyche is very linked to the energy of the reproductive system, you can join the dots to what some of those other addictive behaviors may be. So, when faced with allegations of what let's describe as unfaithfulness, it's crucial to understand the psychological complexity of this man. He is someone who is drawn to exploring unconventional intimacy practices, especially if he feels that people would expect him to be conventionally monogamous. Now, this would be part of his unhealthy coping mechanism from unhealed child wounds. And his motivation for his actions comes from a deep need to test boundaries, to test power dynamics and his own personal limits. So this is someone who keeps many secrets, particularly in the realm of relationship and desire and intimacy, and is very unlikely to reveal these aspects of his life. Now, his choices are like a rebellion against expectation, and he takes pleasure in these things that are hidden and unexplored and unknown. And he's very drawn to these unconventional intimacies, not out of impulse, but as a test, which very dangerous and self-harming type of game is what that ends up being. And when it comes to that part of his life, he's got secrets. He's got a lot of secrets, and he thrives in the shadows, in the shadiness, in the mystery. His choices aren't about betraying trust. They're about pushing limits, questioning norms, and keeping people guessing. That is who he is. So keep that in mind when you are thinking about the claims that the photo wasn't him, that he didn't post it. Think about the words that he didn't say, he isn't saying. Think about that when you think about him, tail between his legs, sneaking off into the distance, hoping that no one asks any more questions. There are skeletons in that man's closet, and he absolutely does not want to have any of them tumbling out. He needs to give an appearance of perfection while having a very distorted view on what that is, and at the same time, an underlying burning desire to rebel against the expected view. So the way I put this story together is perhaps more sorted than others, but timing-wise, last year, when he and his wife put their house up for sale, I believe Luke was being challenged to open that closet of skeletons and deal with them, to look at how wounds of his past hold authority over the way he moves in his current life. And it would seem to me that perhaps that was the beginning of this current situation. Faced with repressed memories and undealt with emotions and secrets, he tumbled into some very unhealthy coping mechanisms. involving some intimacy practices designed to make him feel punished or harmed for being who his wounds were telling him he was. Now, his desire to rebel against the norm won in many aspects, and the authority of that broken child was too much to handle. So here we all are, collectively being forced by the greater powers in the universe to look at unhealed wounds, specifically relating to the mother and father wounds that we all carry. And we see Luke running for the hills, which, for the secrets that I believe he carries, is probably the best way and speed to be moving. I honestly always wish that people in these situations, I wish them the best when it comes to facing these internal demons, but it also frustrates me that someone with so much reach over young men isn't being more honest about the situation. I believe there could be many ways in which admission of the problem and what steps are being taken to heal would be the exact thing many young men need to see from a man in power. So think what you want about this situation. But for me, what we are being told doesn't line up with the rest of the puzzle. And it certainly seems hypocritical as hell to demand self-responsibility in some parts of the Carlton world, but none when it comes to those who hold power. And I hope the next in line for the Sayer's throne isn't just a classic distraction technique that points to a very zoomed out issue, not at all relating to the actual issue. I have belief in those young men who go into battle for their fans and their team every year. And I hope this distraction works in their favor and it keeps people's uneducated, judgmental projections firmly directed at the higher powers sorting their chaos out, not at whether or not one of these young men should have a 100% kick rate because of a made-up amount of money we think they get paid. We need to dismantle the old and build something new. The flag is yours if you want it, Carlton. Go Blues.